Hi and welcome. I'm George Haymaker, a certified brain performance educator and coach. This brain performance community, called The Collective, exists to spark curiosity about what's possible when you start understanding and working with your brain rather than against it. Most people are running their businesses, running their teams, running their day, but they've never learned how to run their brain. The Brain Collective is an incubator, a free space for professionals like you who are curious about mental performance and outcomes. Outcomes like stress management, focus and clarity, emotional regulation, motivation, memory, and so on. All the things we expect our brain to deliver, but rarely understand how the brain produces them. We don't know why they stop working when they do, and don't know what to do to get more of the outcomes that we want. Did you realize that the average professional uses between 50 and 70% of their brain potential? Imagine what untapping and realizing this untapped potential could mean in your life. We expect all of these mental outcomes to just show up and don't feel like it should be necessary to become brain literate and train the brain to get them. Unfortunately, that's just not realistic and in conflict with how the brain works. Did you know that our brains actually respond to training the same way our bodies do? And that mental performance suffers when we don't train it. Today's session is about brain literacy, what it is, why it matters, and how to start mastering the organ that runs your entire experience of life. We'll cover these ideas mostly at a very high level to give you just a taste of what could be for you. And for those of you who want to go deeper into brain literacy, strategies, tools, frameworks, and brain training, I'm launching an education and brain training club called the Brain Club. It's a next level community that will help you realize greater levels of brain capacity and performance. So let's dive in. Most people assume their brain runs on autopilot, and they have little to no control over the mental life that emerges from it. The brain is our operating system and the most important organ in the body. It drives how we think, feel, act, and perform. It also manages every other system in the body, from the heartbeat to food digestion to hormone production. It makes everything else possible. Most of us have never been trained to know how it works, how to optimize it, and how to produce the types of mental performance outcomes that we want. Understanding our brain is the difference between reacting to it and directing it. When you don't understand what drives your thoughts, emotions, and habits, you're being run by default patterns in your brain that have been created over a lifetime, not the intentional construction of the mental life that you want now, and will be most helpful to achieving your future goals. Every mental performance outcome you want, whether it's clarity, focus, motivation, energy, crisper decision making, is produced in the brain by the brain. If you want better mental performance outcomes, you have to understand the system producing those outcomes and how those outcomes are manufactured. Your brain isn't fixed. It's moldable, trainable, and incredibly responsive to how you use it. It's like Play-Doh, ready to be molded and shaped in ways that best suit you. The brain has a special gift called neuroplasticity. It enables you to shape or rewire how you think, feel, and perform now and in the future. We are not stuck with how things are unless we choose to be, or simply don't take the initiative to change it. Most people have a relationship with their spouses, partners, their bodies, their jobs, their phone, but not their brain. The brain is not you. It's a system running in the background that has been wired by you over your lifetime. It is now producing a mental life based on that wiring. But that wiring is plastic and it can change. In fact, it changes every day, and you probably aren't even aware of it. The quality of your life is directly shaped by the quality of your relationship with your brain. You can directly influence how your brain thinks, feels, and performs, but only if you start treating it like a partner, caring for it, and understanding how it works and what it needs to give you the outcomes you want in your life. This is the first step to brain mastery, moving from operating on autopilot to operating with intention. The brain is always sending signals to you, whether it be fatigue, fog, impulsivity, frustration. We often just override or ignore them, since we don't understand these signals and what they mean. Mental symptoms or signals or friction, as I call it, are often just unmet brain needs. Kind of like a baby crying for an unmet need. Overwhelm might mean you have depleted levels of glucose. Impatience might mean you just had a poor night's sleep. And procrastination might mean you're in fear, not that you're lazy. None of our pain points happen without a causal relationship. Ignoring brain signals doesn't make them go away, it just makes them louder eventually. Learning to interpret your brain signals builds brain literacy. And that's the first key to brain performance. Brain literacy is the foundation of self-leadership. Being in relationship with your brain, not in resistance to it or being overwhelmed by it. Your mind is a construction project, and it's ongoing, and your brain is the contractor of that construction project. Your brain doesn't respond to reality. It actually constructs your reality milliseconds in advance of it happening, starting in your subconscious, outside of your awareness. Every person's brain constructs their own version of reality. No two people's reality is constructed the same way. Every thought, feeling, meaning, and interpretation is built by the brain in the moments before the reality of it actually happens, based on our individual past experiences, the present context of the situation that we're experiencing, the information that our senses are bringing in, and our internal body state. All of this information runs through the brain and is filtered by it. The brain then determines the situation's meaning by way of a process called prediction. The brain predicts our life for us in the milliseconds before it actually happens. The brain's primary job is to keep us safe and in survival, conserving mental resources in the process. That's it. That's the only job the brain really has. And it's very important to it. As a result, it must predict the world before it happens to ensure it can keep us safe. It can't wait until the reality actually happens, or we might not survive it. It might be too late. The prediction process conserves mental resources because by predicting it, it shortens the process of building the reality, thus it conserves resources. The brain has a ton of work to do every day. It weighs only 2 pounds, but it consumes 25% of our oxygen and energy. So it's got a lot of work to do. It's working when we're awake, when we're asleep. And so it has to conserve resources. Mental resources are not limitless, they're finite. That's why when you get fatigued, you're running low on mental resources. Each of our brains are predicting the world in advance of us experiencing it, based largely on our past experiences and what the current situation that's about to unfold means to us, based on those past experiences. So the brain is always comparing what's about to happen in front of us with what's happened to us in the past and trying to find past experiences that are like the current situation that we're about to experience. Emotions, for example, aren't hardwired in our brain. They're not automatic reactions. Every emotion we experience is actually newly constructed each and every time. These emotions are formed in the body and interpreted by the brain by comparing them to past experiences. Two people could have completely different emotional experiences to the same situation because we might be taking in the information that's about to unfold differently. And we also have completely different sets of past experiences. So a situation could have completely different meanings and emotional responses to two different people that are in the exact same situation. If past experiences and their meaning are largely responsible for how we interpret and respond to the present, then logic and science say that if we change our current experiences in a more helpful way, then the brain will eventually use those new experiences as our past experiences and use those to predict the future. This means that your experience of life is not fixed. You are not your thoughts and emotions. Your thoughts and emotions are based on how you thought and felt in the past in similar situations to the one that's unfolding in front of you right now. So if you don't like your thoughts and emotions in a particular situation in life, you can simply stop thinking and feeling that way and start forcing new and more helpful ways of thinking and feeling. Those new ways of thinking and feeling will be recorded by the brain, and they'll start to be used as references, templates, by the brain to predict new thoughts and emotions down the road. Through repetition, emotional salience or meaning, and reward, these new thoughts and emotions will begin to stick and start regenerating automatically in the future through prediction. You are the architect of your mind, and your brain is the tool. Positive change happens in our lives when you start intentionally shaping what your brain constructs, not just reacting to what it has built over time as a default. When people understand that their thoughts, behaviors, and emotions come from brain circuits that can be rewired, not fixed character flaws, they regain agency or control over their lives. Having autonomy is one of the 6 core psychological needs we as human beings have. So it's critically important to us. We spend our entire lives trying to meet these 6 core psychological needs, and autonomy is one of them. We realize we are no longer at the mercy of mental patterns we didn't choose and don't want. Understanding why the brain works the way it does gives us the freedom and agency to change the how it can work for us in the future. Knowledge about the brain makes people feel capable, significant, and skillful. It connects change to skill development rather than judgment. It taps into the deep human need to grow, improve, and master new skills. When we are skillful, we feel significant. These are 2 more of each of our human being core psychological needs. So we've now covered 3 of them: autonomy, skillfulness, and significance. Everything we do in life is directed towards meeting these needs. Neuroplasticity says you are not stuck ever. You're just undertrained. You haven't trained your brain enough yet. That perception and knowledge changes your life. Understanding the brain makes your past make sense. People often carry shame or confusion about their thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. When you learn how your brain was just doing what it learned to do to survive, it relieves self-blame and replaces it with meaning and understanding. Relief sets in. That meaning and understanding becomes the foundation for purpose-driven change in your life. If we understand how our brain works, and we know that training it will lead to better performance, then we know we can influence our brain and therefore our life. That alone shifts someone from a helpless reactor to the world to an empowered operator. Having this agency and control creates energy in the form of dopamine release. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation. So when we feel motivated, you are actually experiencing dopamine being released in your body and brain. Getting our psychological needs met is more deeply and intrinsically motivating than receiving any kind of external reward. These external rewards are short-lived. If you've ever experienced, buying a new dress or something cool that you've always wanted, something materialistic, you've noticed that, you get a short hit of dopamine and endorphins, but then it kind of dissipates pretty quickly. But these deep, meaningful psychological needs that we have to feel skillful, significant, autonomous, equal, stable, and together with others, those are the 6 needs. Those are deeply meaningful, rewarding needs that last. When people understand their triggers, patterns, and stress responses are rooted in brain function, not moral weakness or character flaws, it makes their inner world feel less scary and more manageable. It changes the relationship with the brain from overwhelm and lack of understanding to objectivity and clarity. That reduces threat and increases safety and a confidence in being able to navigate life with control. Brain science is evidence-based. It's not fluff. It's not guessing or hope. It's grounded in biology. It's real. The brain is designed to rewire based on experience, repetition, meaning, and reward. It replaces what can be helplessness or despair with possibility. It creates the emotional fuel people need to begin hard, meaningful change. There are 85 billion neurons in the brain, and they don't work alone. They connect to one another to store and communicate information. Our entire mental life is embedded in these 85 billion neurons. These connected neurons are called neural pathways. The information that is stored and communicated within the connected neurons or pathways express themselves as patterns of activation, meaning how these neurons connect and fire with one another. Our past experiences that we've had are not stored as fixed files, but as dynamic, retrievable activation sequences between neurons, patterns of which specific neurons fire, in what order they fire, with what strength that they fire, and in what context. What's actually firing between these neurons are electrical and chemical signaling. The chemical signaling are these neurotransmitters like dopamine. The activation patterns make up all of our past experiences, our thoughts, feelings, actions, interpretations, and the meaning behind these experiences. So every experience you've ever had, every thought, feeling, emotion, behavior, everything is embedded in these 85 billion neurons as activation patterns using electrical and chemical signaling. That's it. Each synapse, which is the space between where these neurons connect to one another, and you can actually see the picture of that in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. That's a synapse, the space between those two. It's called a presynaptic and postsynaptic neuron. Each synapse between neurons is a connection point where information is communicated. So these little dots of communication you see are actually chemicals, neurotransmitters. So when these neurotransmitters flow in these synapses between the neurons, they're actually communicating. There's 100 trillion synapses in the brain, which means unlimited possibility for the brain to store and communicate new and more helpful experiences. These 100 trillion connections are designed to change their connections and activation patterns in response to us changing how we want to think, feel, and behave. So in other words, how these neurons connect to one another, the types of neurotransmitters that are going through them, the strength of that flow of neurotransmitter, the sequence that these neurons are firing, all of that chemical and electrical patterning is actually our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, interpretations, perceptions. All of our mental life is built in our brain like that. So when we change how these neurons are connected to one another because we engage in something that's new and different, it's called neuroplasticity. And these neurons are more than willing to change their patterns. But they only change in response to us initiating the change. They don't lead the change. The brain never leads anything. It only follows what we instruct it to do, what we train it to do. And this is called neuroplasticity, as I said. So if we want to change how we think, feel, and act, the neurons are more than willing to change how they connect and the pattern in which they activate, but it's up to us to lead the way for the brain, not the other way around. The neurons and the neural pathways that make up our past experiences live in what are called gray matter regions of the brain. They're generally around the outer edges of the brain in what's called the cortex. That's where all of our intelligence lies, in the circumference, the outer portions of the brain, right underneath the skull. Each portion of a past experience, like the emotional, cognitive, meaning or action-based, movement-based elements of a past experience, they live in different regions of the brain. So in other words, a single past experience or memory has different components, and each of those components is stored in a different part of the gray matter region. So a single memory or past experience is not stored as one single file somewhere in the brain. It's broken up into pieces based on the specific slice, whether it's the emotional part of the experience, the thought part of the experience, any actions that you took related to the experience, so on and so forth. They're all slices of like a pizza, and they're all stored in different places of the brain. But when the brain wants to access that past experience as a memory, the brain has a network in it that brings all those slices together in as a whole pizza so that we can remember the whole memory as a coordinated experience. Now, these different places of the brain where these memories are stored, they're called brain regions. And they're actually the anatomical parts of the brain. You might have heard some of the names like amygdala, which is the threat response center of the brain, the thalamus or the hippocampus, so on and so forth, prefrontal cortex. These are all anatomical, real-life parts of the brain. And they're connected together by cables called white matter tracts. And those white matter tracts are located more in the center of the brain. So all the intelligence that we have is located around the outskirts of the brain, in the cortex. And then these cables or white matter tracts are connecting these regions together to form networks, like data networks. Every new thought, action, and emotion starts a new connection sequence between neurons. So let's say that you're having an experience you've never had before. What will happen is there will be a temporary set of connections between neurons that will represent this brand new experience that you're having. Now, if you begin to repeat that experience with every repetition, an emotional charge that relates to that experience or meaningful moment that's part of that experience, the connections between the synapses of these neurons and the activation patterns begin to strengthen. So it's kind of like going into the gym, right? You keep going to the gym and keep working out your arms, rep after rep after rep. Guess what? Your arms begin to strengthen. Same thing happens in your brain. With every repetition of every different part of the experience, the connections between those neurons that make up the experience strengthen. So that's how the brain can change. Because if you create new experiences that are more helpful to you than the old ones, those new sets of neurons will begin to connect temporarily. And then as you repeat that experience, because it's helpful to you and meaningful and emotionally important, the strengthening between that set of neurons will strengthen. And if you keep doing it, then the brain will begin to recognize it as important to you, helpful to you, and it will begin to then call upon it as a template for future experiences. So that's how the brain can shift from old unhelpful experiences to new ones. Because if we stop engaging in old unhelpful experiences, the neurons that form that old unhelpful experience will begin to weaken. There's no more signaling because we're not engaging in that experience anymore. So the neurons will begin to weaken and eventually they can start to break apart. So that's how we can move from unhelpful habits and patterns into newer, more helpful ones. These neurons are actually breaking apart, reconnecting, changing the activation patterns, increasing strength, and so on. That is the physiology in the brain behind mental life change. So the brain's not a hardwired machine. It's a dynamic, experience-dependent network, and it rewires in response to what you focus on, find meaningful, and repeat. Here's an example of how much of the brain is involved in a single experience like dancing to a song. Music and movement light up nearly the entire brain. It's one of the most integrative full brain experiences we can have. Numerous brain regions, which are all these little dots, connect together in networks with these cables, white matter tracks, to power different brain domains. And the domains are the functional aspects of the experience that we call dancing to the music. There are 16 domains in the brain that are powered by these regions and networks. So the domains are the functional outcomes. So it's things like memory and motor skills and language and motivation. So these are the things that arise out of the underlying infrastructure of the regions and the networks. The physiology produces functional outcomes, okay, called domains. All of the 16 domains are involved in constructing the dancing experience, every single one of them. Each of us experiences the song and dancing to it differently, though. I know that's hard to believe. You probably think like you're at a party and you're dancing to this song, and you don't realize that every single person that's there is experiencing that moment differently. You probably think that everybody's hearing, feeling, perceiving, sensing everything the same way, but it's not true because everybody's brain's different. It's all been formed and patterned differently over their life. We all have different past experiences that the brain is referencing as templates to call upon to compare what's happening now versus what has happened in the past. So a song could mean two completely different things to two different people. What happens if that song meant joy to somebody, whereas it reminds someone else of grief? So again, reality is different from each of us in slightly different ways. So this shows how the brain constructs an experience like music. It doesn't receive it. We're not passively hearing the music and passively moving to it. The brain is actually actively predicting, synchronizing, remembering, and feeling, and even imagining the next beat and note ahead of time. So the brain doesn't react after the fact. It's actually working a few milliseconds in advance all the time of everything that we experience. You don't realize it because it's going on in your subconscious. All we really receive in our ears are vibrations and pressure. That's it. From there, the brain does the rest. It translates that vibration and pressure into all kinds of information based on our past experiences. This is why music moves us. The power of music isn't accidental. It's the result of massive neural collaboration from all parts of the brain, making music and dance a direct line to whole brain engagement and expression. Here are the 16 trainable domains, the functional outputs that all the brain parts and the connections between those parts, the networks, with those cables. So that's like the plumbing. And it produces these trainable brain domains, the skills that the brain produces. This is how we go through and are able to navigate life, is by having these skills. When you combine these 16 trainable domains, you actually get your level of intelligence. So intelligence isn't just how much information you can cram in your brain and recall at a later date. That's one small slice of intelligence. And it's produced by these networks here. But there's a whole bunch of other measurements of intelligence. For example, social intelligence and empathy. So let's say that you can read a book and remember everything in it and regurgitate it. Okay, great. But you have zero social intelligence. You can't interact with others. People are uncomfortable around you. You can't relate to them. You don't feel empathy. Social intelligence and empathy is every bit as important and as much a measurement of intelligence as knowledge retrieval. We don't look at it that way, but it is. You could be the smartest guy in the world, but never advance in your career because you don't have any of these other forms of intelligence. And remember that every single one of these is trainable, expandable. You can actually increase your level of intelligence by working in these 16 domains. The average professional is only using about 50 to 70% of their brain potential in these domains. Think of what unlocking and tapping into this untapped intelligence can mean in your life. When you're training a domain or network, you're training the neurons in the network to connect together in patterns that represent the mental result or outcome you want. So as you're training, you can actually do things to train these domains. These neurons are actually moving around. And if you're becoming more intelligent in one of them, you may be forming new connections between neurons, and the patterns of activation could be strengthening. Because it's like going to the gym. The more that you work out your muscle group, the stronger it gets. The more that you train a brain domain, the stronger that it gets. The domains are powered by networks of brain regions connected together by white matter tracks, as we've discussed. And many times, most times, a domain is powered by more than one network. So, these domains where they're located are not relevant in terms of where they are in the brain, because typically multiple parts of the brain are working together over these cables. Different parts of the brain are contributing to producing working memory, for example, or our ability to pay attention. That capability is coming from different parts of the brain all working together at the same time. Now, each domain draws from the same mental resource tank. So in other words, as I said earlier, the brain weighs 2 pounds, but it uses 25% of our energy. Energy is ATP in the brain. ATP is comprised and manufactured by glucose and oxygen that come to the brain from the body through the blood. And this energy is manufactured in each of the neurons. But, as you probably are aware from living your life, there's a limited amount of energy that we have, right? You can't just go on and on and on and on without feeling fatigued at some point. So that's what's happening when you feel fatigued. You're actually running through and draining and coming to the bottom of your mental resource tank, which contains, again, glucose, oxygen, and neurotransmitters. All these domains share and compete for these limited energy resources. Using up all the resources on one domain affects the performance of the other domains. So let's say that you were highly emotional for whatever reason, and you are using up a ton of mental resources, glucose, oxygen, and neurotransmitters, to be this highly activated emotional state. Because when you're highly activated in any way, you are using up resources at a high clip. It's like speeding in your car. Okay, the miles per gallon start to go down. Okay, so if you are highly activated in one of these domains and using up a ton of resources, then the tank of mental resources is draining for all of them, because they all share the same storage of glucose, oxygen, and neurotransmitters. That is why recovery, nutrition, sleep, stress regulation impact all the domains at the same time. So as I said, we only use 50 to 70% of each of these domains' potential due to lack of understanding about how these domains work, lack of training to expand their capacity, lack of nervous system and brainwave regulation. Because remember, again, when we're highly activated in our nervous system or emotional domain, we are spending resources at a rapid clip. So that's why regulating ourselves and being calm and emotionally stable are critical, because if we're not, we are spending resources at a really fast clip. Poor brain care habits like sleep, diet, nutrition, and exercise. This slide shows how mental experience is built, stored, and shaped, from the tiniest firing neuron to large-scale domains of focus, memory, emotion, motivation, and so on. You don't train your brain all at once. You train it layer by layer, from the neuron to the pathway, all the way up to the full domain. Neurons, they're the single brain cells, there's 85 billion, that fire electrochemical signals. Each one stores and transmits fragment of experience. They're the basic building blocks of all brain activity. Every new insight, habit, memory begins with a firing neuron. Neural pathways, which are groups of neurons wired together through experience. They're wired together by these connections at synapse points, connected through electrochemical signaling. They form patterns for thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and reactions. They strengthen with repetition. This is neuroplasticity in action, what fires together wires together. Brain regions. These are the physical or areas or the anatomical parts of the brain. So again, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and so on. Each region specializes in certain tasks, like fear, logic, memory, and so on. Regions work together in networks, connected by these cables or white matter tracks. During complex mental activity, regions are like brain departments, like accounting, finance, marketing, sales. Each one has a job. But then they communicate and work together to make the whole thing come together. Brain networks are multiple regions communicating in real time to complete functions. Some of the examples of these networks are default mode network, central executive network, attentional control network, and so on. Active brain networks can consume significant mental resources, especially when they're dysregulated. But the draw happens at the neuron level. The neurons are actually spending this energy. When a network is activated, thousands or millions of neurons fire in coordination across multiple regions. Each firing event uses glucose, oxygen, which come together to form ATP. And they also use neurotransmitters, making neural activity the true point of resource consumption. Networks are how the brain gets work done. And the brain domains, the highest level, are the emergent functional skills or capabilities that all of this plumbing inside the brain produces. Things like focus, motivation, memory, self-awareness. Each domain is powered by multiple networks working in coordination. Domains are trainable and can be optimized with targeted input. Your brain performance lives in these domains. When we train a domain, we upgrade how you think, feel, and function. At long last, the end. So up to this point, we've laid the foundation for what it means to work with your brain, not just use it. You've seen that your mental life isn't something that just happens to you. It's constructed and predicted by the brain, and it's shaped by your past experiences, your current nervous system and emotional state, and the way your brain is wired to process the world. You've also seen that your brain is a living, trainable system made of neurons, pathways, regions, and networks, all working together to keep you safe, predict every moment in your future, and produce your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. You've seen that your brain is trying to communicate with you all the time through your energy, your emotions, your thought patterns, and your emotional reactions. It's giving you feedback. It's so important we listen to this feedback, understand what it means, and know what to do in response to the feedback. The more you understand how your brain works, the more you can stop reacting on autopilot and start shaping your experience in real time on purpose. This is brain literacy, and it's the foundation for brain performance. You can't improve the performance of something you don't understand. I hope you enjoyed our first session of Brain Performance Collective, where we focused on the importance of brain literacy. Take it from me, a guy who until 12 years ago had no idea how the brain worked and thought the mental life I had was the one I was stuck with for the rest of my life. A serious health event 12 years ago that involved my brain forced me to learn more about my brain and make serious changes to how I was treating it. I can't begin to tell you what a difference it makes when you know exactly why things happen in your mind and exactly what you can do and need to do to change or improve something that's not helpful. Next week, we'll discuss mental resources in some more detail. What they are, how to create more of them, how to spend them efficiently, how to expand the capacity of our intelligence domains, optimize brain performance through our nervous system, and how to utilize our brain capacity more efficiently. I hope to see you then. It's every Wednesday at noon Eastern Time. Thank you for your attention.